Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome back for uh, another lesson on in the book of 1 Samuel. And tonight we're going to get probably one of the most famous of all the Bible stories that you learned as a kid. Little Davy beats up on Goliath and kills him. So not exactly how that worked, but we're going to jump into it tonight anyway. So before we begin, we'll begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. All right. So tonight, talking about David, the giant killer. Here's our little timeline here as to where we are yet. We're somewhere right in this time frame here because David is not the king. He's just barely on the radar scope. So he's right in here someplace. And of course, this is the other timeline that we had that shows David. Right in here along with Saul and Jonathan. And the surprising part of this whole lesson to me was that because all my growing up I had always considered Jonathan and David, they were like high school buds. They were the same age, and then they would go out and do stuff together and talk about the girls they'd met and all of that kind of stuff, and but no, that wasn't exactly the way it was. It was definitely um, uh, that Jonathan was 20 to 30 years older than David was. So it's just kind of a wake up call for me as I got to studying this stuff. So there's lots of stuff that as I study this, it just blows a whole bunch of preconceived notions about what we had been taught all our lives. So, in fact, let me just ask right now: is on the story of David and Goliath? Is there any I don't know, something that you grew up with that you think? Well, maybe I should ask the question then at the end of it when we get through with all of this. Think about it. Are there things that you thought you knew, but then you didn't know that you didn't know after we finish this lesson? That some of the ideas that you were taught as a child, and then now after some however many years later, you look at it and says, oh wow, that's not exactly the way it was. So um, just keep that thought in mind as we go through the lesson. But now, before we get going into it, are there any comments or questions like from last week or anything else that we're talking about today? Any comments or questions? Just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in. Okay, so if not, then there's this other chronology of David's life here that that we've got, and again, anytime we have these chronologies of David, there are problems with it because they in some ways they just don't make any sense. And tonight we're going to be talking about some of those that like the anointing by Samuel, the defeat of Goliath, and then also stuck in here was where David was called into the court of Saul to play his harp for him and sing for him, and those three things. Normally speaking, what they'll do is they'll teach those things as if they were in chronological order. The way that they're put in there is chronological, and meaning that that's how it happened in David's life. And there is a term for that that really, I don't believe this is the way that it actually happened. The everyone talks about the anointing of David by Samuel as being, when David was 12 or 13 years old. Maybe so. But then when David is brought into the king's court, but he keeps coming back and forth into the king's court, and then he goes out there and kills Goliath, and Saul says, who is this kid? Well, if it already been in Saul's court as his favorite harp player, you would think that he would know who this kid is and who his father is, and so forth. So there are some anomalies there, I guess you would say, with the dating of David's life and some of these things, and that's not an uncommon thing when we're going through the study of the Bible, because the stories, there every once in a while you get a story, and then or a description of something, and then the narrative jumps back to another episode that, I mean, it's just like the Star Wars episodes. I mean, you start out with the one. Well, that's actually the one where we started out with back, however many years ago. That was actually number 3 or 4 in the whole sequence of them, and then you had to wait another 8 or 10 years before you ever got back to number 1. And so you see that also in the Bible every once in a while, and I think that's what we're seeing here with David. And I tried this week to get my finger on the thing there and just see, okay, now what dates would I put on this, and how would I kind of describe these things so that they make sense to me anyway. And I'm still not there yet, to tell you the truth. And that, because I put this stuff together and I says, yeah, but, and then I'd go back to something else. So it is a little confusing as far as the time frames go. But and when you get with different writers, different commentators, they have their own particular idea of it too. So it's it's just one of those kind of things that we're kind of plagued with. It doesn't make it that it doesn't mean that the Bible is in error. But it does what it does mean is that maybe it didn't tell everything, because the Bible doesn't, it's not a comprehensive book. It doesn't tell everything all the time. But what this does do is it tells the stories, and they're not always exactly in sequence. Okay, so we're looking at this chapter here, chapter 17, is totally, the whole thing is about the battle, or the episode between David and Goliath. And it's, there again, one of the most one of the most well-known of all the Bible stories. And in fact, uh, the idea of Goliath and David, we use this in our just everyday language. Where somebody is, if somebody is going up against a corporate giant, or a big politician or something like that, you call it well, David's going up against his Goliath there. Or sometimes, when you have something that is very large and big, they'll say something about it being a Goliath. um, and so these two words, the idea of David and Goliath, uh, have become just commonplace in our society, in our language. And I think just about every other language in the world that where they study the Bible, that you'll see that. Now, I've already spoken to these ideas of the age and the sequencing of David's life, and really, when I would study these various authors that talk about the David and so forth, I don't get any agreement. There's some that will say no, this happened at this time, and so here's one that actually. Um, to me, it makes it's an honest assessment here, because here it says the dates are approximate. There is not a definitive timeline of King David's life, and there's not. Everywhere you look, it's just a little bit different. Things happen just a little bit, you know, uh, a little bit different. Now, other here, we know that David was born, and that David died, and then, but let's look at, right here, the where David is anointed um, as king. That to me it's very strange, very odd that he would be anointed as king, as the next king, at the age of 12, 13, something like that. And then he gets picked to go to the king's palace, or the court anyway, because I don't think back in those days that they really had what you'd call a big palace. It was just maybe just a little nicer than what everybody else lived in. Um, and that he played the harp there and sang for King Saul. And how would they have kept it quiet that David was anointed to replace Saul, and that his number one son Jonathan was not going to be the next king, but it was going to be David? That would I think that would cause some problems in the court. And so those two episodes right there, I'm not real sure how they played. Were they could they have kept a secret? I mean, that David was anointed in front of all of his brothers, and so um, then his brothers end up going and fighting in the army for King Saul some years later. And would they have been able to keep it quiet? That how soldiers are, they're just like everybody else. They're going to talk and says, hey, yeah, my little brother, for a few years ago, Samuel, that prophet, he came along, and silly, that prophet, man, he was just I don't know what he was thinking, but he anointed David and said, you're going to be the king after Saul. And yeah, how would that have gone over? I just don't know that was where that fell in the sequence, how they would have kept it a secret, and those kind of things. The idea that David was out attending to the sheep, uh, from what I've read, that traditionally it's the young guy, the youngest of the brothers, that gets stuck with tending the sheep, where the other brothers, they graduate to something better than just tending the sheep. So this is kind of I look at this then here as these two here, we don't really know where they play, which was David anointed before he went to the court, and so and Jeff is saying, are there any dates associated with this chart, or is it just an approximate sequence of events? I think it's an approximate sequence of events, um, Jeff, because it says up here the dates are approximate, meaning there is a thing on here, and it will be in my notes when I put out my notes tonight, that what those approximate dates were. and again, they're really mushy because everybody has a little bit different idea of it, and so, but that will be in the notes as I put them out there. But yeah, I was trying to figure out, this. Okay, so when does this David kills Goliath? Okay, is there a date assigned to that? Again, it's all over the place as to who says what thing. One of the big commentators, guy named Kaufman, he says that this happened 27 years after the Philistines were defeated by Saul at Michmash, and so then other guys says, "Oh no, this might have been just a short time after David was anointed, maybe 4 or 5 years, because Saul just calls David a youth, and so forth." So, yeah, I'm not really sure where that. Uh, I think that the idea of David killing Goliath is much later, where David is probably in his 20s, maybe something like that, because if you look at let's see if I'll pull it up here. Well, in fact, maybe I can pull it up here on the sequence. Um, um, that will here we go. Where down here at the later on, um, and where that Saul and David are talking, and so Saul um, clothed David with his own garb and put him on his bronze helmet, and clothed him in armor, and you know David strapped his sword on the garment, tried to walk, but he was not used to it. David was, he told him, he says, "I can't walk in these. I can't use these because I'm not used to it. This is, it's not my armor." It doesn't say anything about David being a it says, "Oh, just a wee little lad," like the Sunday school stories, that here he is, only, you know, maybe a teenager, just an early teenager or something like that. But no, at this point, uh, David, remember, Saul was head and shoulders above everyone else in stature. And here's a guy now. David can go and put on Saul's armor and then say, "No, it just doesn't. I'm not used to it. I'm not used to wearing armor. It's unnatural for me." And put it back. No, he never said, "Oh, this is way too big for me because you're grown up and I'm just a wee lad." So. Anyway, that's a thought. Alan said when he showed up for the battlefield, his brothers certainly didn't treat him like a king. Like, is that what you're saying? Didn't treat him. Uh, I don't know. And there again, that's something else that people have talked about. That what was it with David that he was perpetually stuck with the sheep?
Yeah.
But
What I was trying to say, I didn't finish it there, was that, they, what are you doing here? Who are you? I mean, they didn't act like this is someone they had seen being anointed by Samuel.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. It was so that there again, that whole sequence of being anointed by Samuel, just I just don't know how those things play out. We know he was anointed by Samuel. We know that he killed Goliath. We know that he was in Saul's court, but the timing and so forth, we just really don't have um, a good a good play. Okay, now, Deb, you said that one of your chronological Bibles identifies around 950 BC as the time when David slays Goliath, um, and citing Saul becoming king at about 1000 BCE. Okay, now let's see how that goes back to um, our that's not what I was looking. Yeah, I guess it is. But I'm back in my PowerPoint instead of the other. But let's look at here. And you said about 10 or 950. Yeah, see, now that would put 950 would have put it way down after his death, according to this chronology. And that's what I say. Sometime, and here's another one. Okay, 950 again would have been after the reign of Solomon. In fact, this one up here. Yeah, David died in 971. So yeah, I don't know. I've pulled up other chronological Bibles. That's why I say, man, you can get them all over the place. Now, Carl, you're saying that if he was in his 20s, he would have been in Saul's army. He was too young to be in the army and was carrying food for his brothers when he saw the Goliath tauntings. There is that too, but at the same time, um, not everyone was conscripted or drafted, um, out of every family, and so David's would have been that only David's three oldest brothers were old enough to get in there, and the other ones were not. It's just hard to say, but most everybody. I don't know. A lot of the commentators they put David in the idea in the place of being, just a mere teenager, and but there are also references to talking about David as a mighty man of valor at that point. So it's just kind of all over the place. It's just confusing as heck to try to figure out what the time frame on that, and I still have not got my arms wrapped around it. I'm not sure I ever will, because it's something I would really love to be able to figure that out, but so far a lot smarter guys and all those PhDities, they haven't figured it out yet either, or they all agree disagree with each other. So maybe one of these days I'll I'll call up some of my own friends who are the PhDities and see what they think, rather than just these ones that I'm reading from their books. So anyway, this was this was a little chart that I found, and it was kind of leans a little bit more into what I was thinking about it, that somehow David killed Goliath some years after this stuff here, because then we see later on that Saul is saying, well, who's this guy that just, who is this guy, this David? Um, because you'd think that, okay, if he's in my court and he was playing and singing to me all the time, I would know who he was. But if David did this as a young teenager, and then this turns out that he kills Goliath some 10 years later, the the difference between being a young teenager that can't grow a beard yet to a guy, in his 20s that then would have a full beard and so forth. Maybe that's why I didn't recognize him. And who knows? It could be that Saul's mental state was such that he couldn't have recognized him anyway. So we just don't know. All right. So anyway, now getting into an area, this is where this whole thing took place, and this is actually looking um, kind of. I think it's kind of looking east, if I remember right, because I've I've been right up here where they're taking this picture from, right here. I've stood right there looking out that direction. I was trying to find some of my old photos of that area too, but the um, and they're showing that the battle was over here and that the Saul's camp was over here. Um, and it may be true. I don't know. It's just that when we were there, the um, um, guide told us that no, this was where Saul was, up here on top of this hill. So, okay. And Deb says, I also read the Hebrew word that translated as boy is Na'ar, and this was used to describe young men. And that is true. He was Na'ar, not Yelet. And it described young men. Um, for example, Benjamin, the age of 30, Absalom, mid 30s, for example. Okay, so there again. So yeah, Mickey said put the PowerPoint in the slideshow mode. Yeah, I could do that. I mean, both the PowerPoint and the Acrobat Reader are the same thing now. The same set of sequence of slides. Was there anything that was like it was better in the PowerPoint for your presentation? I don't know. Would there be a reason for that, Mickey? Because I can do it either way.
I think you're getting a little bit chopped off because we're not seeing the whole slide, so to speak.
Okay. So, all right. Well, all right. So I'm in that, and then I go down here to the slideshow. And how about that? Does that?
That's going to be better when we get to that. Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't realize that.
I thought it was getting chopped off on the bottom, but it still may just not be there.
It is. Well, I was trying to get the whole thing in there. That just a lot of times when I find photos, the aspect ratio just doesn't work out all that good, and then when you try to get it to maybe fill out the whole wide angle thing, you got Stan Laurel looking like Oliver Hardy, when you stretch it out to the side. So, and those, I think most everybody here could probably know who Laurel and Hardy were, and Flaco y Gordo. So anyway, this is where they told us, and this little brook actually we come. This is a state park up here on Azaka, that from this hill up here. It's a national park, and then you take the bus down across here, and sure enough, this little brook down here. This is the little brook, and it kind of runs through here and back through here and around. And sure enough, down the bottom of this brook, even today, 3,000 years later, there's little pebbles, little rocks, because water's been running through that thing since, since Eve was a teenager, So it was kind of interesting, and they told us that the battle took place right down here where all of these greenhouses are now. And so that was one of the problems that they have all throughout Israel, is that so much biblical history gets covered up in the in just life, development, real estate development is what it amounts to. So, but anyway, here's another map, me and my maps, to kind of give you an idea of where we are related to this. And and I got a few problems with this particular map, because it says David. This is David, is his journey to uh, here as a Azekah, and that he goes all the way up to Jerusalem and then across over here and around here and so forth. I'm not really sure where he gets that particular um, route that David would have taken, because that's obviously twice as long as it would have taken him to go from Bethlehem uh, and into Azekah. But anyway, this kind of gives you an idea of where they are right here in central Israel. Gaza down here. That's totally, all this stuff is really totally Philistine territory back in that day. Now then, later on, when David becomes king and he defeats the Philistines, they get relegated back to this just little strip right along the coast and so forth. But by this time, they had, after Michmash, and they had gotten strong again, and they had continually pushed the into the Israeli territory, and they had expanded their borders quite a bit, as you can see right there. So then, and here's this Elav Valley. Now, like I said, Kaufman was saying that the battle was about 27 years after Michmash, which in some aspects makes sense. And they were in when they got arrayed for battle here, they were there, it says, for 40 days. They'd been standing there, at each at loggerheads for 40 days. I was reading some other accounts of battles this week that talked about that, and said that a lot of times these the armies back in those days, they would get arrayed against each other, and they'd really, in many ways, they didn't really want to go into battle because they knew it was going to be ugly, and they're not real sure that they could win if they went into the battle. So a lot of times I was reading about one battle where the two countries, or the two forces, stood out there against each other for 3 months, and finally they just decided, let's all go home. And then they went away. There never was a battle, because they arrayed for battle, and then didn't get into it, because they were not assured that they could win. Maybe their fortune tellers and so forth, the guys that cut open the goats or whatever and look at the entrails, all they could see were entrails and no sign from above. So at any rate, they were there in a stalemate for 40 days. No, to me, that's kind of significant in a way. 40 days. We see, where other places do we see 40? You see 40 days where Moses was up on Sinai, and you see the Israelites wandered around in the desert for 40 years, and Yeshua himself was in the wilderness, tempted by Satan for 40 days. So it's many times the number 40 is associated with some kind of testing, kind of thing. So then this valley, one of the reasons that they wanted it was this valley was it was an easy route. You saw from the picture how it was kind of nice and flat, but you could follow that valley. There was water there, and they could follow it right on up into the heartland of Judah. And so militarily speaking, it was an important valley. And there was just one other opportunity for the Philistines to jump into, to expand their territory. And so that's kind of why Saul had arrayed against the Philistines there, because he said, we can't let them invade our southern area down here. Remember, Saul was a Benjamite. He was from up in the north. And so here he was trying to protect his southern flank there. And that's why that would have been very, very important to them. So, here's kind of, let's see, that picture there. And it looks like these guys here, what they do is they misspell stuff and don't catch it until they've already published it, just like somebody else I know does. But all right, so anyway, that there's just another picture of it. And so who is this guy Goliath? Now, some people say, well, he was one of the Nephilim, or the Anakim, or something like that, who was this supernatural, almost a supernatural race of giants that descended from, like, especially if it was Nephilim, that when the sons of God came in and had relations with the daughters of man, and then that's the offspring were men of great renown. And so, there's people that really want to just go on and on and on about the Nephilim and so forth. But I don't get too wound up over that personally. Maybe some of y'all read up a little bit more on that than I do, but it just never was really something that interested me. So I don't get into it that much. So, but Goliath was born in Gat, just actually a few miles from this battle, and supposedly he had other brothers who were also large. So his condition of being so tall would have been possibly a hereditary thing. So we don't know where people, that they're a group of giants and so forth. I think a lot of us know of families where just about everybody in the family are large people, and it's in their genetic makeup. But the giantism, a pituitary giant as this guy may very well have been. How predominant is that? We don't know. But he could have been somebody like, who was the movie guy, Andre the Giant, the wrestler, and then the movie guy, and where he did have a hormone type of imbalance that caused him to grow to such great heights. But it was also very hard on his body, and he died a young man too. So the Bible calls him a Philistine, but he might have been an actual Philistine, descended from the Phoenician people, or he could have been a Philistine mercenary. Either way, especially if you point to the idea that him coming from a family descended from the giants in Hebron. Remember where Caleb had to go and defeat the giants at Hebron and chase them down into the Philistine territory, and then that's where they settled. And so he could have been from that. We don't know, and it's just the Bible calls him a Philistine. Could have very well have been also a Philistine mercenary. And there were other Goliaths in the Bible. So the idea that the name Goliath could be a description, and it also could be just something that people they used. Yeah. Carl saying there were giants in the in the land at Kadesh Barnea, and um, he could very well have been a descendant of this. Of course, that was what 300 years later, so I don't know uh, how that played into things, but um, there were other Goliaths, and later on in the Bible it talks about how that Goliath was defeated by um, um, I've got a senior moment here. A guy named, it starts with an E, but it's almost like the Ephrathite, an Ephrathite or something like that. And so uh, it could be talking about another Goliath and another guy, or it could have been harking back to this Goliath and David being from Bethlehem Ephrathah. So you can look at both of them that way and kind of explain away or at least come up with some kind of an explanation for the seeming discrepancies in the Bible. And uh, so we don't know. Goliath may have come from a family of larger people, and like Carl said, from that area down there in Kadesh Barnea, and also Hebron was known for having very large people. And they say he could have been up to 9 to 9.5 feet tall. That would have put him, when they say he was 6 cubits and a span high. If a cubit measured from your elbow to the tip of your finger, your middle finger, was 18 inches, give or take, then yeah, he could have been, and a span being, from your little finger to your thumb like that. He could very well have been 9 foot, 9.5 feet tall. But again, it's just how do you measure what is a cubit? And I've seen cubits being measured from anything from very rarely about 12 inches to but 15 inches, somewhere between 15 and 18 inches, that 3 inch span there. And that wouldn't have made a whole lot of difference, because Goliath would still have been a very big dude. And so that's who he was. And we know then that the size of his weapons, his weaponry was it was pretty impressive. That his armor weighed 5,000 shekels. And again, it's how do you measure, what value do you give to a shekel? And so that it could have been something that he was wearing would have been 125 to as much as 195 pounds. And if you look at the armor that back during the Middle Ages in Europe and so forth, where these guys wore the male coats, which were the little chain mail things, and or the full armor, like knights in shining armor. Those things were very heavy, and those guys were not all that big back in those days. The guys in Europe, 5'6" was just about, that was a little bit on the larger side from what the suits of armor that we've found over the years. And so those things would have weighed, somewhere 65, 70, 90 pounds. That would be an awful lot for a guy, from that was just a normal size person, regulation size, as it were, to carry around. So the idea that he could carry this 125 pounds up to 195 pounds, would indicate that, yeah, he was very big and very strong. Said that his spear, the shaft on his spear, was like a weaver's beam, and that would that harks back to what you're talking about, on these big looms where people would weave their own cloth in the homes and so forth. So that would have been okay. You think maybe I don't know, like a 8 or 10 foot 4x4, if you were to think of it in something that you could visualize. So maybe a 4x4 that's about 10 feet long, and you knock all the rough edges off of it. But that would be how he would, um, about the size of his lance. And that the head on that lance, they said, it would weigh somewhere between 16 and 23 pounds. And so that would that would be very significant when you consider, any of you have ever lifted weights and you're lifting like a 20-pound weight. Yeah, okay, yeah, you can lift it around and do all sorts of things with it, but it's still substantial. And just the idea that the lance tip itself, the head on it with the arrow on it, I'm sure it had, to be almost 20 pounds. Very significant, I would think. And then they didn't even talk about his brass helmet as to how big that thing would have been. Um, my goodness, it would be like a big wash tub or something to go over that coconut. So, and then he had what, brass greaves they talk about. These are shin guards or leg guards for his knees and his lower legs. So, I mean, the guy was big and he was outfitted. He was a soldier's soldier back in those days. And I'm sure that and it talked about he had a shield that had an armor bearer. Well, back in those days, an armor bearer, I mean, only like royalty had armor bearers, but his shield was so big that he had a guy that his whole job was just to carry around that shield. So anyway, that's what little Davy was up against. And so what was David's weapon? Now this was it. It was a sling. Now I'm sure that many of you may have seen slings, and I'm going to try. I don't know if this will work. It's just like a minute and a half. Let's see what it looks like. I'm experimenting on you guys tonight, trying to expand how we do the lesson and, and see if I can get you any more interesting stuff. Let's see what it does. And I don't even know where it's going to show up. Let's see. I didn't do it. Let me see here. Oh, well, okay. Oh, maybe so. I got the little circle of death moving there. And here you go. Okay, so stop that, and we get back to see how I can get back to where I was. Okay. All right. Now, did that? Uh, oh, it didn't have any audio. Oh well, shucks. Anyway, that was a deal they were talking about. I could tell you about it, but I don't have the English accent to go along with the narrator there. But what he was showing, that those slings were from. He was talking about the Aztecs against the Spaniards, and that how that the Aztecs were very effective against the conquistadores, with their slings. And so yeah, I mean, you get smacked up the side of the head with one of those things, it's lights out, you know. So anyway, here's another example of what the sling would have looked like. You know, just rawhide pieces there with leather, um, and okay, next time turn on closed captions at the bottom right corner of the video. Gotcha. And like I said, we're all this is a learning experience. Heck, I'm just it's always something. All right, so that was David's weapon, and then something that always bothered me about the story of David and Goliath was the idea of that. Okay, you got two armies arrayed against each other, and then you got one guy comes out there and he's the biggest, baddest dude you ever saw. And he says, all right, you guys, you come out against me. You send out your champion and we'll fight this out to decide who's going to be the winner. And so then if I win, you guys are our slaves. If you guys win, then we're your slaves. And did it really work out like that? So did a lot of reading, a lot of research on that thing, trying to find something. And the ancient armies, sometimes they did use single combat. They would actually do that, but it was not one of those things where everybody agreed that they were going to live by that, the winner of the single combat. That just wasn't going to happen like that. But what they did do was it was an indicator. They would send out, you know, each one would send out their champion and they would fight to the death. And then whoever won, that would mean that their deity, their God, was the most powerful. And that would be kind of an indicator of how the battle would have gone. Of course, you know, that really means nothing. It just meant that their one dude was stronger than your dude, or whatever it was. And but that's what they would do sometimes, because they were always looking for a sign of some sort. And the Romans did that all the time. They would send out their biggest, baddest guy to fight whoever the other guy was. And then at the same time, they were big into fortune telling, and so that they would um, they had these people that would, again, slit open the goats, look at the entrails and all that kind of stuff. And it was called, and uh, a word that comes from that we still use today is augur. And that, and we'll say something that, well, all of these signs augur well for a good harvest, or augur well, if you've, I don't know, maybe you don't use that word, but it is still a valid word that is used today, that something augurs well, meaning the forecast, that, so has anyone besides me ever used that or seen that word? Maybe some of you school teachers or something in the group. But anyway, it's just Yeah, it's just a word that we still use today in some circles. So um, anyway, so that was after for studying this thing. Had answered a question for me, and that's one of the questions that how in the world could they put this guy, especially somebody that had just he had dropped in out of the hills with a donkey loaded down with cheese, and said, oh yeah, I'll fight this guy. Sure, go ahead and fight him, and we'll just all of our whole futures and everything is just going to be on this guy, and so um, the Israelites had no intention of surrendering. Whether they just thought, okay, here's somebody that's crazy enough to go fight Goliath. Who knows? Maybe whatever, But we're still not going to surrender to him, and that makes a whole lot more sense. All right. So finally, then Goliath, the guy was obviously a big bully. He was large. He was used to getting his way. Nobody would get in his way. And so he got out there and he talked about how that he was the one that actually captured the ark and killed Phineas and the other priests and the sons of Eli and so forth. Which, if this was 27 years earlier, probably highly unlikely, because there's no other literature that talked about a giant that comes in there and kills everybody, and so probably not all that likely that he had done that. That it just is, he was lying, and so he boasted of how big and bad he was, and it's kind of like the Maoris in New Zealand. When they would go into battle, and you've seen them, they would paint their faces all up, and then they would make ferocious faces, and they would shout together and make the enemy, is putting up a show to make themselves more ferocious before the enemy, and maybe the enemy wouldn't attack them. And so this is kind of what he's doing. But then you get David. So there's David's turn to get out there and speak to the giant. And so when David had his turn to get out there, David was not so braggadocious. He didn't get out there um, and start bragging on how good he was or this and that and the other. He had already talked to Saul about that, and so anyway, when he got out there before um, Goliath, David just said, "Look, I'm coming to you." He says, "Your mistake is that you're blaspheming my God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so." Um, you come to me with your spear and all that. He says, I come to you in the name of Adonai Svaot, the Lord of hosts. And so at that point, they finished their speechifying. And um, and so then what's the final score? They got through talking, and then they started running toward each other in battle. And so the whole time David's running toward him, he's got his sling and he lets fly with the thing. And you know the story. The rock hit Goliath right between the running lights, and he fell down on his face. There again, you got these naysayers that will talk about, well, how could he have fallen on his face if he had, gotten hit in the head like that and it was enough to kill him? Remember, he was running forward, gets hit in the head. His momentum would have still had, he'd have probably skidded for another 100 feet or so, just dropped on his face like that. And so David got out there. He pulled Goliath's sword out of the sheath, out of the scabbard, because Goliath didn't even have his sword out. He was just coming. He had his little spear, his big spear in hand. That was his preferred weapon, and he was running toward him. I'm sure that he thought that he was so big that he had just squashed David, but if nothing else, just run right over the top of him and squash him like a bug. And he was not counting on the accuracy of the sling and the power of God's hand in that little rock that he got hit right in the forehead, and it was lights out. So David grabbed the sword out of the scabbard. We don't know how big the sword was, but I am sure that it was all that David could do to pick up that sword. Shoot, it might have weighed 50 or 60 pounds or more, and to pick that thing up, and then he chopped off Goliath's head. And then the Bible says that he he kept the armor, the sword, in his own tent. Now, there are people that say, well, he meant that he kept it in Goliath's own tent after they came back from chasing the Philistines and killing them all. They went back to their camp and took the spoils of war. And David, of course, got Goliath's tent, and he put all the stuff there in Goliath's tent. And then there are others that said, no, that he did that because David, here he is. He just came down with his donkey and his cheese, and he didn't have a big tent or anything like that. But we don't know. It just, the Hebrew is not clear there. It just says he took took the sword and put it in his own tent. To me, that's saying somewhere along the line, David had a tent to stay in. And so he put that sword as a trophy in his own tent. But the head of Goliath, he took that rascal and decorated one of the gates there at Jerusalem with the head of Goliath. That's that was to let everybody know. And I think maybe it was a sign for the Jebusites later on that, okay, you better stand by, because our God is bigger than yours, and this is what happens. So anyway, what happened then, the Philistines were thrown in such a panic to see that their champion was defeated, that they, and I'm sure that God had a little bit to do with that, to get them all wound up. And so he chased them. The Israelites then were chased the Philistines down that valley and back toward the Philistine cities, and there was a great slaughter. They just really whooped up on them, and that kind of shut the Philistines down for a time. And they were still remained a big force, because then we see later on where actually David was maybe not an ally, but the Philistines didn't mess with David when he was chasing Saul, because they looked at Saul to be a bigger threat. So they were still trying to get Saul. And so it's one of those deals of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they let David alone until then later on he became king over the united Israel. And at that point, then they decided, okay, no, we got to fight David. And so they did, and they lost again. So anyway, that's the story of David and Goliath. Now,